Today's video is another compilation of scary stories from Reddit. There is 5 in total. Her eyes were black, not dark, but black. It was a face, just beneath the bridge, looking up at me. That's when I realised they weren't watching me walk up. They'd been listening. About 6 feet in, I saw a sleeping bag, and next to it, once I swore I saw a pale hand just inside the shadows, fingers lightly gripping the frame. Let's get straight to the first one. I hope you enjoy. I'd been driving the same back roads through rural Norfolk for years, and every time I passed the overgrown turning near Carrick Vale, I saw the same warped wooden sign. Brackenford Hall, 1 mile. The sign leaned at an angle, its paint sun-bleached and peeling. My friend Dan and I joked about it. A hull sounded like something from the 1940s, not a modern railway. One drizzly Sunday afternoon in October, we decided to follow the sign. There was no plan, just boredom and the itch to see something forgotten. The road narrowed until it was barely a single lane. Brambles clawed at the wing mirrors and rain pattered against the windscreen. We finally reached what could only be called a clearing, except it wasn't clear at all. Weeds grew waist high, and moss had claimed the crumbling brick of the station's outer wall. The station itself sat on a low embankment, its roof caved in at one end. A rusted set of steps led up to the platforms. The faded enamel sign still clung to the wall. Brackenford Hall. The letters looked like they'd been through decades of frost and sun. Dan grinned. This is perfect, but nobody's been here in at least 50 years. We climbed the steps. The platform was narrow, lined with splintered benches. Beyond the track lay thick woodland that swallowed all sound except the rain. There was no wind, no birds. The quiet pressed on my ears like static. It was Dan who spotted the waiting room. Its windows were boarded over, but the door hung on one hinge. We ducked inside, the damp air hitting us immediately. It smelled of old paper and dust. The room was small, just a bench running along 2 walls and a ticket window covered with grime. On the floor lay a scattering of brittle, yellowed train schedules. I picked one up carefully. The date read March 1975. The last printed train was marked as simply cancelled. Dan laughed. Guess they really did stop the trains. I don't know why, but I pocketed that schedule. And even now, I wish I hadn't. We spent another 20 minutes wandering around the platform, peering into the shadows beneath the canopy, taking photos. It was only when I heard the faint rumble that I stopped. It was a sound I knew well, the distant roll of a train approaching. But there was no track maintenance here, no scheduled service, and the steel rails had long since been buried in grass and weeds. Dan frowned. You hear that? I nodded, and without speaking, we both stepped toward the edge of the platform. The sound grew, accompanied by a low vibration under my boots. I glanced down. The gravel between the sleepers was shifting. The air grew heavier, colder. A thin mist began seeping along the rails, curling around our legs. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The vibration looked at each other, uneasy. Dan tried to laugh it off. Probably a freight line underground or something. But freight trains don't run on overgrown, disconnected lines. And mist doesn't just vanish in an instant. Yeah, that's exactly what it did. We decided to head back, but as we reached the steps, something caught my eye. Inside the waiting room, pressed against the grime-coated ticket window, was the faint outline of a face. It was there for only a second, pale, expressionless, and then gone. I didn't want to go back, but Dan did. A week later, after dark, he convinced me. It's creepier at night, he said, grinning as if that were a selling point. We parked further down the lane to avoid being obvious and hiked in with flashlights. The station looks worse in the beam. The shadows deepened every crack and gap in the wood. Our boots crunched on wet leaves as we climbed the steps. The moment we stepped onto the platform, I noticed the temperature drop. Not the kind of cold that comes from night air. This was sudden, unnatural. Dan walked ahead toward the waiting room. It was exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. The schedule I'd taken was back. It lay neatly on the bench, unfolded, the date side facing up. My stomach tightened. I hadn't told anyone about it, hadn't left it there. It had been in my desk drawer all week. Dan whistled softly. Alright, that's weird. Then the rumble began again. This time it was louder, closer, accompanied by a faint whistle, the kind from steam trains. The mist rolled in thicker, swirling around us. Through it, I saw shapes forming along the opposite platform, blurred figures, standing still. Some wore hats, others clutched small suitcases. None of them moved. Dan's voice was low. Mate, they're looking at us. The whistle blew again, long and mournful. The figures turned in unison toward the tracks, and then a train emerged. It wasn't solid. It shimmered, its windows dark, the metal warped and ghost-like. It slowed to a stop, steam hissing silently into the air. The doors opened, though there was no sound of them moving. One by one, the figures boarded, all except one. She remained on the platform opposite, her pale face catching the light of my torch. Her eyes were black, not dark, but black. And then she stepped toward the edge, directly across from me. She mouthed something. I couldn't hear it, but I understood. Get on. I don't know why I stepped forward. Dan grabbed my arm, muttering, don't. But I felt pulled, not by curiosity, not by will, but by something colder, deeper. The mist thickened until I could barely see Dan. The opposite platform seemed impossibly close now, like the gap had narrowed. The woman still watched me, her lips unmoving now, her head tilting slowly. The whistle blew again, this time sharper, impatient. The figures inside the train stared from dark windows, their faces pale blurs. Dan yanked me back hard, breaking my gaze. My flashlight slipped from my hand, clattering on the platform. The sound, sharp and real, shattered whatever hold that moment had on me. When I looked up again, the train was moving, stepped back, swallowed by the mist, and then nothing. The platform was empty. We didn't speak as we left, didn't look back until we were in the car. Dan started the engine, his hands shaking. It's been 3 months since then. I've driven past that sign twice, but I can't bring myself to turn down the lane. The schedule is still in my drawer, though I've tried to throw it out 3 times. Each time it's back the next morning, perfectly folded in my drawer. And last night I woke up to the faint sound of a train whistle, far off in the dark. We were about 3 hours into a late drive when my friend Mark missed the exit. It wasn't a big deal. The GPS said there was another route, but this one cut through an area I didn't remember seeing on any map. The road was narrow, lined with black trees that leaned inward as if they were trying to listen to us pass. It was rural, but not the kind where you occasionally see a barn or a mailbox. This was the kind where the air feels heavier the further you go. There were no houses, no street lamps, just a faded white line in the middle and the hum of Mark's headlights picking out bits of cracked asphalt. About 20 minutes in, the GPS cut out completely. No service, no map, just a blue dot spinning uselessly. Mark laughed it off. I didn't. There was a point, right around when we passed the collapsed fence, where I realised the air smelled faintly of something metallic, like rain or rust, but it hadn't rained in days. And then we saw the bridge. It wasn't a proper bridge. It was made of wood, old enough that parts sagged. There were no rails, just planks worn by years of use. A faded sign at the entrance read, "Weavers Crossing, weight limit 2 tons. The wood groaned when we drove over it. Halfway across, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something pale between the gaps in the planks. I leaned closer to the window, thinking it was water. But it wasn't. It was a face, just beneath the bridge, looking up at me. My whole body locked. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The features were blurred, like they were seen through fogged glass. But the eyes weren't right. They didn't blink. I turned to Mark, my voice catching in my throat. "Did you?" He cut me off. Just don't. We drove the rest of the way without speaking. On the other side of the bridge, there was a single-lane road leading into what looked like a small town. It wasn't abandoned, but it might as well have been. Every house we passed had curtains drawn, no lights on, no movement. We stopped at a 4-way intersection where a convenience store sat under a flickering sign. Mark wanted to see if they had a phone, and I stayed in the car. From the driver's seat, I watched him walk up to the door and stop. He stood there, unmoving, for maybe 30 seconds before he turned back and got in the car. "They're all watching," he said quietly. I didn't understand until I looked. Every window on the second floor of the store had faces in it. Dozens of them, perfectly still, eyes all fixed on us. We drove out without another word. The road out wasn't the same as the one we came in on. It was wider, newer, almost like it had been paved yesterday. After 10 minutes, we were back on a major highway. The GPS came back. It acted like Weaver's Crossing didn't even exist. Later that night at the motel, Mark finally told me what he'd seen inside the store. He said the clerk was standing behind the counter, smiling, but his teeth were the wrong colour. Not yellow, not brown, but grey, like stones pulled from a riverbed. And when Mark asked if they had a phone, the clerk just shook his head, but didn't stop smiling. He also said something I'll never forget. When he turned to leave, every face in the windows lifted their hands at the same time and waved, but not in a greeting, more like they were saying goodbye. The kind of goodbye you'll give to someone you expect to see again, whether they want to see or not. I'd been planning the hike for weeks, a long weekend to myself, away from work, my phone switched to airplane mode, just me and a map of trails I'd never walked before. The plan was to follow the Brindale Loop, a marked 14-mile route that curved through the forestry, moorland, and back to the tiny village where I'd left my car. The first day was perfect. The air was cool, the early autumn sun broke through thin clouds, and the trail was quiet, just the wind moving through the grass, and the occasional cry of a bird. The heather brushed at my legs, releasing that faint herbal scent you only notice in open country. Around midday, I reached a fork where the way markers had faded to almost nothing. One arrow pointed toward the loop, the other toward something simply marked Old Ridge Path. I hesitated. I'd read about the ridge online, an older trail that wasn't maintained anymore, bypassed for safety reasons. It ran parallel to the main loop but higher, with panoramic views. The decision took all of 3 seconds. I took the ridge path. The incline was gradual, but the track was rougher than I'd expected it to be. Moss had swallowed some sections completely. Half an hour in, the trees thinned and the ground levelled into a wind-swept plateau. The grass up here was a dull gold, moving in waves with each gust. I could see for miles, the valleys to the south, a grey ribbon of road to the east, and far ahead, the dark smudge of more forest. And that's when I noticed it, a small, upright shape on the crest of the ridge ahead. At first, I thought it was a fence post, but it moved. It was hard to judge the distance, but it couldn't have been more than 200 metres ahead. I stopped walking and squinted against the light. The shape shifted slightly, enough to tell me it was definitely a person. The problem was, there was no reason for anyone to be standing there. The ridge wasn't a through route, at least not anymore, and they weren't moving along the path, just standing angled toward me. I took a sip of water and tried to be casual, telling myself it was just another hiker taking a break. But the moment I started walking again, I realised something that made me feel sick. They were still facing me, exactly. I slowed down, glancing at the ground, pretending to check my map, hoping they'd turn away. But they didn't. Their stillness began to feel deliberate, like they were waiting for me to reach them. I stopped again, This time, I decided to wait them out, let them move on first. I stood there, breathing in the cold wind, trying to look like I was just admiring the view. 2 minutes passed, then 5. They didn't move. Eventually, the ridge narrowed. The only way forward was to pass them. I told myself that was fine. I'd nod, say hello, and keep walking. It was no big deal. But as I got closer, the details didn't seem to make sense. They were wearing something pale, not quite white, but a washed out grey, loose fitting and hanging low. The posture was strange too, stiff in the shoulders, like they were holding their arms slightly away from their body. When I was maybe 40 metres away, they turned, not toward me, but slightly to the side, so I could only see part of their face. That's when I realised they weren't watching me walk up. They'd been listening. The wind carried no sound except for the rustle of grass, but the way their head tilted, slow, precise, made my skin crawl. It wasn't the casual glance of someone noticing company. It was deliberate. I called out, just a, "Hey there." My voice thin in the empty air. No response. Another 20 metres, and I could make out their clothes weren't modern. The fabric looked coarse, uneven at the edges. I couldn't see their eyes clearly, but I could feel their attention shift back to me, like a weight. 10 metres, and then, without any sign of movement, they were gone. I froze. The ridge ahead was empty. There were no rocks to duck behind, no trees thick enough to hide anyone. The grass was short, nowhere near high enough to conceal a person. I walked forward slightly, scanning the ridge in every direction. Nothing. The only marks in the grass were my own boot prints. My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't run, not yet. But I turned down the slope toward the main loop far earlier than I'd planned. The descent was steeper here, forcing me to watch my footing. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder. The ridge was still empty. Halfway down, the wind shifted, and I heard it, faint, far away, the sound of footsteps on dry grass. I stopped dead, listening. The sound stopped too. I called out again, louder this time, my voice cracking. The emptiness just swallowed it. The last stretch of descent was a blur. I hit the main loop and didn't stop walking until the sun began to drop and the outline of the village appeared between the trees. I told myself it had just been another hiker, that they turned off without me noticing, that the sound on the slope was my own boots echoing in the wind. But the ridge isn't wide enough for someone to disappear without a trace, and every time I think about it, I remember something I didn't want to admit at the time. The grass, where they'd been standing, was perfectly still. The wind was pushing against my back the whole time. It should have been moving. I've lived in my current apartment for just over a year. It's not fancy, a small one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a 1970s brick building, but it's in a decent area, and I'd gotten used to the creaks and groans of the place. The first time something felt off, it was so small that I didn't even really register it. I'd come home from work, toss my keys on the counter, and notice my kitchen blinds were open. I always keep them closed. I'm not paranoid, I just don't like the idea of people seeing in from the parking lot below. I I told myself I must have left them open that morning without even thinking. But later, I found my TV remote sitting on the coffee table when I always keep it on the arm of the sofa. Again, small, stupid things. But over the next month, little details kept catching my attention. My toothpaste would be at a different angle. My favourite coffee mug, the one with the chip on the rim, was in the cupboard, but not in its usual spot. And then there was the smell. It was faint, not bad, just lived in, but not by me. Like someone else's laundry detergent mixed with a scent I couldn't quite place. I started paying closer attention. Every morning, before leaving for work, I made a mental note of exactly how things were. The position of my shoes by the door, how far my bedroom door was open, and the placement of my toothbrush. When I came home, there were changes, sometimes tiny, my shoes angled differently, sometimes bigger, my bedroom door fully shut when I'd left it open. I tried telling myself it was just forgetfulness, stress, but the thing about tracking it deliberately is, you can't pretend it's random. It was always the same areas: kitchen, living room, bedroom, never the bathroom, and never my desk. That's where I kept my laptop and paperwork. Like whoever or whatever was moving things was avoiding anything that might give me proof. I casually brought it up with Mrs. Heller, the older woman who lived across the hall. I made it sound like I was just being nosy. Anyone ever had problems with the maintenance guys coming in without notice? I asked. She frowned. Not that I've heard. You're supposed to get a slip under the door if they need to come in. She paused, then leaned in a little. Though, I have seen someone on your balcony once or twice. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? Could have been you, she said, squinting like she was trying to picture it. But they were out there, smoking once, leaning on the rail. I figured maybe you'd had a friend over. I don't smoke, and I haven't had friends over in over a month. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator faint through the wall. I was trying to tell myself it was nothing. Around 2 a.m. I heard it, the soft scrape of fabric on fabric. It came from the living room. I sat up, heart hammering, straining to listen. Nothing. I told myself I was just imagining it, but I stayed up until dawn. The next morning, I placed a small slip of paper, just a ripped off corner of an envelope, on top of my bedroom door. The idea was simple. If the paper fell, someone had opened the door while I was out. When I got home from work, the paper was gone. Not on the floor, on my dresser, just gone. The next weekend, I decided I couldn't keep wondering. I checked every inch of the apartment, inside cabinets, under the bed, behind the couch, nothing. Then I remembered. The building had a shared crawlspace above the third floor hallway, a low attic area with insulation and pipes accessible by a small hatch near the laundry room. I dragged over the step stool from the supply closet, pushed the hatch open, and peered inside. The space was dark and heavy with dust. About 6 feet in, I saw a sleeping bag, and next to it, a half-empty water bottle and a crumpled grocery bag with snack wrappers inside. There was no way to tell how long it had been there, but the wrappers weren't from brands that I bought. didn't touch anything. I just climbed down, closed the hatch, and went back into my apartment. For the next few days, I went through the motions: work, home, eat, sleep. But every time I stepped inside, I wondered if they were above me, listening, waiting until I left. I haven't told the landlord. I can't explain why. Maybe I'm scared they'll clear it out, and I'll never know if that was the person moving my things. Or maybe I'm scared they'll check and find it empty. Because then I'd have to ask myself, if no one's been living up there, who's been inside my apartment? When I first moved into the building, the balcony sold me on it. 9th floor, a good breeze, a view of the east side that caught the golden light in the morning and bled into deep orange at sunset. The building itself wasn't impressive. Beige hallways that smelled faintly of dust and old carpet, elevators that hummed too loudly. But the balcony felt like my little square of freedom in the city. Across the courtyard stood the twin building. Same design, same stacked balconies. You could almost trace them like rows in a spreadsheet, perfectly aligned floor to floor. It took only a couple of nights before I noticed the 11th floor, third balcony from the left. Unlike the others, which had potted plants, bikes, laundry racks, or just empty space, this one had a single white plastic chair. Always in the same spot, facing outward, not toward the courtyard, not toward any neighbour, just fixed toward the skyline. The first time I spotted it at night, it gave me an odd sense of anticipation, like someone was going to come out and sit there any second. They never did. One Saturday afternoon, while waiting for laundry to finish, I asked the building manager about it. He didn't even pause to think. That unit's empty, been empty for years, he said, flipping through his paperwork. Something about the way he said years stuck with me. After that, I started paying more attention. I'd glance at the balcony while drinking my coffee in the morning, or while winding down at night, and every so often, in the corner of my eye, I could swear there was a shadow in the chair. It wasn't that I saw someone, not exactly. More like I'd catch myself scanning the balcony, and for half a second, my brain would register a shape in the chair. Something slouched but upright, the way people sit when they're deep in thought. And then I'd blink, and it would be gone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the railing casting odd shadows, headlights from the street playing up against the white plastic. But patterns started to emerge. The chair looked slightly different depending on the day. Sometimes a little more turned inward, sometimes with its back legs closer to the railing. Not by much, but enough for me to notice. One evening, while scrolling on my phone outside, I realised I'd been sitting there for 20 minutes without moving, and yet the hair on my arms was raised like I was being watched. I looked up slowly, and there it was. The chair was empty, but the balcony door behind it was slightly open. It had never been like that before. Over the next week, I made it a point to check it every night. Sometimes the sliding door was closed, and sometimes it was open. Once I swore I saw a pale hand just inside the shadows, fingers lightly gripping the frame, gone before I could focus on it. I debated telling someone, but telling someone what? That a chair across the courtyard seemed to have a mind of its own, that I might have seen a hand. Instead, I did something I now regret. I started keeping my lights off at night, sitting in the dark so I could see across without a glare. that's when I noticed the chair wasn't always facing outward anymore. Some nights it was angled slightly toward me. It was around then that I began waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning without a reason. Every single time I'd find myself walking to the balcony door, sliding it open just enough to peek out. And every single time my eyes would land on that 11th floor balcony. The chair would be there, facing me still. One night, unable to help myself, I waved. There was no response. I felt embarrassed and silly. I was waving to an empty chair. But just as I turned to go back inside, I thought I saw the shadow of someone standing just behind the glass. The first time I saw him, if it was him, was 2 weeks later. It was late, past midnight, and the city was unusually quiet. No traffic, no sirens, just the soft hum of my fridge inside. The chair was empty, but the balcony door was wide open. I leaned forward, elbows on the railing, straining to see into the darkness beyond it. And then someone stepped out. A tall figure, but not unusually so. Thin. I couldn't make out his face, if he even had one in the shadows. But he moved to the chair and sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world. I should have felt relief, proof there was an actual person. It wasn't just my imagination. But the way he sat, unmoving for minutes at a time, made something in my chest tighten. Then, slowly, his head turned toward me. I froze. Even from across the courtyard, I could feel it. That locked gaze, heavy and deliberate. We stayed like that, both motionless, for what felt like hours. And then, just as slowly, he raised his hand and pointed to his right, toward my balcony. I stumbled back inside, heart pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I didn't look again that night. The next morning, the balcony was empty and the chair was gone. It's been a few weeks since then, and every night since, I've kept my curtains drawn, avoiding that side of the apartment entirely. But sometimes, in the early hours, I wake up anyway. And when I do, I swear I hear the faint squeak of plastic shifting under weight, coming from just outside my own balcony door. So that was the last story for today's video. I hope you enjoyed them. Until next time,